She was the ghost of the third floor, the quiet one, the night nurse who moved through the sterile hum of the intensive care unit like a whisper. They saw a woman, plain and efficient. They never saw the soldier she had been. And then the night exploded, and the ghost became a hunter. Now, let me take you inside the longest night of Anya Sharma's life. The air in the ICU was a carefully curated cocktail of antiseptic, recycled oxygen, and the faint metallic tang of human struggle. It was a smell Anya knew better than any perfume. She moved through the twilight world of beeping monitors and softly breathing ventilators, her footsteps lost in the gentle hiss and click of the machines that sustained life. Her rounds were a ritual, a silent dance of data and observation. Vitals checked, IV drips monitored. Patients turned with a strength that belied her slender frame. She was a creature of routine and precision. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a severe functional bun. Her blue scrubs were immaculate, creased only by movement, never by carelessness. She spoke when necessary, her voice low and calm, a soothing anchor in the disorienting sea of critical care. To the other nurses, she was reliable, if distant. To the doctors, she was a pair of hands, an implement to carry out orders. To Dr. Alistair Finch, the hospital's celebrated chief of surgery, she was little more than furniture. He strode onto the unit that night with the self-importance of a minor deity visiting the mortal realm. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, his expensive suit immaculate beneath a crisp white coat that seemed more a cape than a piece of medical attire. The scent of his cologne, a sharp citrus and sandalwood affair, cut through the sterile air, an unwelcome invasion. He stopped at the central nursing station, his gaze sweeping over the charts with theatrical disdain. Anya was finishing her notes on the patient in bed 4, a complex post-op with a fragile hold on consciousness. Sharma. Anya didn't look up immediately. She finished her sentence, capped her pen with a soft click, and then turned her head. Dr. Finch. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, narrowed. He hated being made to wait, even for a second. It was a disruption in the natural order of his universe. The new admission in 6, the VIP. I reviewed his intake chart from the ER. The saline lock in his left forearm was placed by a paramedic. It's functional, but it's sloppy. I want it replaced. Use a 20 gauge and find a better vein. The man is not a pincushion for amateurs. Anya's gaze flickered to the clock. It was 2 in the morning. A non-urgent IV replacement was busy work, a task designed to assert dominance, not for patient benefit. The existing line was perfectly patent. The patient is sedated and stable. His current access is secure. I see no clinical indication for a replacement at this time. Her voice was level, professional. It was the tone of a clinician stating a fact. But to Finch, it was the squeak of a mouse challenging a lion. A cage of silence descended around the nursing station. The other night nurse, Maria, suddenly became intensely interested in organizing a stack of gauze pads. Finch took a step closer, lowering his voice to a venomous whisper that was somehow louder than a shout. Are you questioning my medical judgment, Nurse Sharma? He let the word nurse hang in the air, weighted with contempt. Your job is not to have an opinion. It is to follow orders, my orders. You will go in there and you will replace that line, and you will do it with the respect and deference that a man of his stature deserves. Is that understood? Humiliation, hot and sharp, pricked at the back of her neck. It was a familiar feeling under his command. He was a master of the public dressing down, of chipping away at a person's confidence until they were too small to fight back. She could feel Maria's pitying gaze without looking. Anya's shoulders tensed like an internal switch had been flipped. For a fleeting moment, the quiet nurse vanished. In her place stood someone else, someone colder and harder, someone who had been addressed with far worse words by far more dangerous men. The instinct to snap back, to dismantle him with a few carefully chosen, brutally precise words, was a physical urge. She suppressed it. This was a different battlefield. Here, survival meant swallowing pride, not breaking jaws. Understood, doctor, she said, her voice flat, betraying nothing. He gave a curt, satisfied nod, the victor of a battle only he was fighting. See that you do. He turned and swept away, his expensive leather shoes squeaking on the polished linoleum, leaving a wake of arrogant silence. Anya stood motionless for a long moment, her hands clenched into tight fists at her sides. She slowly, deliberately uncurled her fingers one by one. She was a professional. She would do her job. The patient in bed 6 was a mystery. He had arrived an hour before dawn, not through the chaos of the emergency bay, but via a private elevator from the underground parking garage. He was surrounded by men in dark suits who did not identify themselves, but carried an aura of quiet, lethal authority. They cleared the hallway, their eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. They spoke in low murmurs into their wrists. Federal agents, Anya had guessed, or something similar. The man on the bed was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with a powerful build that even injury and sedation couldn't completely hide. His face was a roadmap of a hard life, etched with lines of command and worry. A shock of steel gray hair fell across his sweat-beaded forehead. His chart was a study in minimalism. Name, John Doe. Diagnosis, multiple traumatic injuries, post-stabilization, no history, no allergies listed, no next of kin. Anya entered the room, the glass door sliding shut behind her with a soft whoosh. The only person remaining from the security detail was a large man seated in a chair by the door, his posture relaxed but his eyes missing nothing. He nodded at her, a silent acknowledgement. She approached the bed, her movements fluid and efficient. The patient, this John Doe, was hooked to a web of wires and tubes. The rhythmic beep of the cardiac monitor was a steady drumbeat in the quiet room. She checked the ventilator settings, the output from the chest tube, the color of his skin. Everything was as it should be. Then, she looked at the saline lock in his left forearm, the source of Finch's manufactured outrage. It was a clean insertion, well secured, the work of a competent medic. Replacing it was pointless, but an order was an order. She gathered her supplies, her hands moving with an economy born of 1,000 repetitions. As she swabbed his arm with alcohol, the cold sting of it seemed to rouse him slightly. His eyelids fluttered. For a second, his eyes opened, not fully, but enough. They were a startlingly clear gray, clouded with pain and medication, but lucid. They focused on her face. She met his gaze. "It's all right," she whispered, the way she did to all her patients, a mantra of reassurance. "You're safe. Just a little sting." His eyes didn't leave hers. They held a flicker of something she recognized. Not just pain, not just confusion. It was assessment. The rapid, calculating inventory of a man used to sizing up threats and assets in the blink of an eye. His gaze dropped to her hands as she prepped the new catheter. She worked with practiced ease, tourniquet on, vein located, needle inserted with a smooth, flawless motion. There was no hesitation, no fumbling. It was the work of an expert. As she secured the new line with a strip of tegaderm, she tied off the small loop of tubing to the patient's arm to prevent it from snagging. She didn't use a standard hospital slipknot. Muscle memory, deep and ingrained from another life, took over. She tied a taut line hitch, a specific, non-slip knot taught in elite military field medicine. It was faster, more secure, and could be released with a single specific pull. A relic of a past she kept buried under layers of sterile blue scrubs. The man's eyes widened just for a fraction of a second. The fog of sedation seemed to part. His gaze locked onto the knot. His lips parted, a dry, rasping sound emerging. It was a single word barely audible above the hum of the machines. "Ranger." Anya's blood went cold. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. A recognition. A password spoken across a chasm of years and experience. She froze, her hands hovering over his arm. Her mind raced, a flood of memories she kept dammed up, threatening to break free. The dust of Afghanistan, the humid jungles of South America, the cold, brutal efficiency of training. She quickly composed herself, her face a mask of professional calm. She finished securing the line, her movements perhaps a little too sharp, a little too precise. "You're in the hospital," she said, her voice steady, ignoring his word. "You need to rest." He closed his eyes, succumbing to the drugs once more, but Anya felt the shift in the room. An invisible line had been crossed, a secret had been shared without a single word of confession. The man in the bed was not just a VIP, and he knew she was not just a nurse. The thought chilled her more than any of Dr. Finch's public humiliations. She had built this life, this quiet, anonymous existence, as a fortress, and a crack had just appeared in the wall. She left the room, her heart hammering against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. The guard at the door watched her go, his expression unreadable. She walked back to the nursing station, the familiar, sterile environment suddenly feeling alien and unsafe. She felt exposed, as if a spotlight had been switched on in her carefully constructed darkness. Not a hero, not a witness, just a ghost. That was the plan. But ghosts can be seen by other ghosts. The next hour passed in a blur of routine that felt anything but. Every soft chime of an elevator, every footstep in the corridor sent a jolt of adrenaline through her system. Her senses were on high alert, a state of being she hadn't allowed herself to slip into for years. The hum of the fluorescent lights seemed louder. The shadows in the corners of the unit seemed deeper. She was cataloging exits, choke points, potential weapons, a fire extinguisher, a heavy chart binder, an oxygen tank. It was a cage of her own paranoia. She told herself she was overreacting. It was a coincidence, a word mumbled in a drug-induced haze, but she knew better. The knot, the look in his eyes, the single word. It was a signal. He knew. Around 3:15 in the morning, the first anomaly occurred. The security monitor that showed the feed for the ICU waiting area flickered, then went dead. A blue screen with the words, "No signal," appeared. Maria sighed. Great. Tech support won't be in for another 4 hours. I'll go put an out-of-order sign on it. Anya said nothing. She stared at the blue screen, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. Coincidence? Or the first move in a game she didn't know she was playing? 10 minutes later, a new janitor she didn't recognize pushed a cleaning cart onto the unit. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, with a sullen expression and eyes that didn't fit his role. They weren't bored or tired. They were sharp, watchful. He moved too quietly, with a practiced grace that was at odds with the clumsy cart. He began mopping the floor near the entrance to the unit, his back to the nursing station. Anya watched him in the reflection of a darkened monitor screen. His movements were methodical, but his attention was elsewhere. His gaze kept flicking toward the hallway, toward the private room at the end of the corridor. Room 6, not a janitor. Her pulse quickened. The air grew thick, heavy with unspoken threat. She glanced at the guard outside the VIP's room. He was still in his chair, but he was no longer relaxed. He was leaning forward slightly, his hand resting on his thigh, inches from the bulge of a weapon beneath his jacket. He had seen the new janitor, too. He knew. The world seemed to slow down, to narrow its focus to the space between the nursing station and the man with the mop. The rhythmic beeping of the monitors became a countdown timer. Anya's hand rested on the heavy stainless steel thermos she always brought to work. It was full of black coffee. It weighed nearly 3 pounds. The elevator chimed. The sound was unnaturally loud in the tense silence. The doors slid open, and 2 men in police uniforms stepped out. They looked official. Their uniforms were crisp, their sidearms holstered. But something was wrong. Their boots were wrong. They were military-style tactical boots, not standard-issue police footwear. And their eyes had the same hard, predatory look as the janitor. The janitor stopped mopping. He turned, and his hand dipped into the large trash receptacle on his cart. It came out holding a pistol, a suppressor screwed onto the end of the barrel. The 2 uniformed men drew their weapons simultaneously. The guard outside room 6 was already moving, rising from his chair, his own weapon clearing its holster. He never had a chance. The janitor's suppressed pistol coughed twice. 2 red blossoms appeared on the guard's chest. He collapsed backward against the wall, his gun clattering to the floor, his eyes wide with surprise. Maria screamed, a short, strangled sound that was cut off as one of the uniformed men leveled his pistol at her. Not a sound. Time, which had slowed to a crawl, now snapped forward with brutal velocity. Anya moved. She didn't think. She didn't plan. Her body simply reacted, dredging up years of training from the depths of her memory. The quiet nurse was gone. The soldier was in control. In one fluid motion, she grabbed the heavy thermos from the counter and hurled it. It flew, end over end, a silver blur, and smashed into the face of the man threatening Maria. The impact was sickeningly solid. Bone crunched. The man staggered back, his nose a ruin, his weapon firing reflexively into the ceiling tiles. Plaster dust rained down. Anya was already vaulting over the high counter of the nursing station, landing in a crouch. The second uniformed man swung his weapon toward her. She lunged forward, staying low inside his firing arc. Her left hand slapped the gun aside as her right hand, fingers rigid in a knife hand strike, slammed into his throat. He choked, a wet, gurgling sound. His eyes bulged. He stumbled back, clawing at his crushed larynx. The janitor was turning toward her now, his pistol tracking her movement. He was the professional, the most dangerous one. Anya snatched a rolling IV pole, a heavy steel thing on casters, and shoved it hard. It careened across the floor and slammed into the janitor's legs, knocking him off balance. His shot went wide, punching a hole in the wall behind her. She didn't hesitate. She closed the distance. He tried to bring the gun back on target, but she was too close. She drove her shoulder into his chest, ramming him backward into the wall. His head connected with the drywall with a hollow thud. She drove the heel of her palm up under his chin, snapping his head back. At the same time, her hand clamped down on his wrist, twisting it at an unnatural angle. The gun fell from his numb fingers. She kicked it away, sending it skittering across the linoleum. He was strong, a bull of a man, and he fought back, his massive hands grabbing for her. But she was faster, more precise. She was a surgeon of violence. She ducked under a wild swing and drove two quick piston-like strikes into his floating ribs. He grunted, the air forced from his lungs. She hooked her leg behind his and twisted, using his own weight against him. He went down hard, the impact shaking the floor. Anya came down with him, her knee pressing into his sternum, her forearm braced across his neck, cutting off his air. He thrashed beneath her, his face purpling. But her position was perfect. The leverage was absolute. She held the choke, her face a mask of cold, dispassionate fury. She watched the life drain from his eyes, the fight seeping out of him until he went limp. Only then did she release the pressure. Silence descended. It was a profound, ringing silence, broken only by the frantic, high-pitched beeping of a dozen monitors whose patients had been disturbed by the noise. Plaster dust drifted in the air. The sharp, acrid smell of cordite hung heavy, overriding the hospital's sterile scent. The man with the crushed throat was on his knees, gasping for air. The one she had hit with the thermos was slumped against the wall, unconscious. The janitor lay still beneath her. The federal agent by the door was dead. Maria was huddled behind the counter, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror and disbelief. She was staring at Anya, not as the quiet, reliable colleague she knew, but as a complete and terrifying stranger. Anya got to her feet, her breath coming in controlled, even streams. Her adrenaline was a roaring fire in her veins, but her mind was icily calm. She scanned the unit. 3 hostiles down, threat neutralized, but it wasn't over. This was just the first wave. She picked up the janitor's pistol, the metal cool and familiar in her hand. She checked the magazine, nearly full. Her movements were economical, practiced. She stripped the weapon from the unconscious man, tucking it into the waistband of her scrubs at the small of her back. She did the same with the third weapon. A soldier never left a good weapon behind. "Maria," she said, her voice sharp, cutting through the other nurse's shock. It was a command, not a request. "Call a code silver, hospital security, then call 911. Tell them active shooter, 3rd floor ICU, officer down. Tell them multiple assailants. Go, now." Maria just stared, paralyzed. Anya took a step toward her. "Maria!" The name was a whip crack. "Do it!" The command broke the spell. Maria scrambled for the phone, her hands shaking so badly she could barely dial the numbers. Anya turned her attention to the real target, room 6. This whole violent ballet had been for the man in that bed. She moved to the door, pistol held low, in a ready position. She glanced down at the fallen agent. His sacrifice had bought her precious seconds. She would not let it be in vain. She knew they would be coming. An assault like this was never a single fire team. There would be more. They would be better. They would expect resistance now. Her mind was a whirlwind of tactical calculations. The ICU was a terrible place to defend. Glass walls, multiple entry points, but it was also what she knew. Every room, every supply closet, every piece of equipment was a variable she could use. She peered through the small window in the door to room 6. The patient was still on the bed, seemingly oblivious to the chaos that had erupted just outside his room. The monitors still beeped their steady rhythm. He was the objective. Protect the objective. She could hear the distant sound of shouting from the floors below, the first stirrings of a hospital in panic. Soon this place would be swarming with security, with police. But soon was a lifetime in a firefight. She was on her own. She pressed the emergency lockdown button for the ICU. Heavy magnetic locks engaged with a solid, reassuring thud. It wouldn't hold them for long, but it would buy her time. Time to prepare. Time to turn a sterile medical ward into a killing field. The quiet night nurse was gone, erased by the sudden brutal return of the past. In her place stood Sergeant Anya Sharma, call sign Spectre, and she was going to hold the line. She moved back into the room of the VIP, the glass door hissing shut behind her. The air inside was still calm, an island in the storm. She checked the man on the bed. His vitals were stable. He was her responsibility. Not just as a nurse, but as something more. He had recognized her. He was one of hers. An unspoken oath, older and deeper than any hospital policy, had been invoked. She began to work, her mind a cold engine of tactical improvisation. She disconnected the heavy bedside monitor from the wall mount. It was bulky, but its metal casing could stop a pistol round at a distance. She propped it on the floor, angling it toward the door to provide a small measure of cover. Next, she grabbed the heavy, rolling crash cart from the corner. She positioned it alongside the bed, creating a barrier. It was flimsy, but it would obscure the line of sight. It was all about layers, delay, disrupt, destroy. Her ears were strained, listening for the sounds of the next assault, the whine of the elevator, the splintering of a door, anything. The patient on the bed stirred. His eyes opened again, clearer this time, the sedatives burned away by the surge of his own adrenaline. He looked at the pistol in her hand, then at her face. There was no fear in his eyes, only a grim understanding. "Report," he rasped, his voice weak but imbued with a lifetime of command. Anya didn't miss a beat. "Initial assault team neutralized. 3 hostiles down. Unit is on lockdown. Expect a secondary breach. Identity of assailants unknown, but they are professional and well armed." The words came out clipped, precise. A field report. He nodded slowly, his gaze sharp. "The agent?" "KIA," she said, the acronym falling from her lips with a bitter taste. "Killed in action." "He bought us time." The man absorbed this, his jaw tightening. "And you?" "Operational," she replied simply. He tried to sit up, a grimace of pain flashing across his face. "Need to get to comms." "Negative, sir," Anya said, her tone firm but respectful. "You are the asset. My mission is to protect you. Stay put." The use of "sir" sealed it. They were no longer nurse and patient. They were soldiers. He sank back into the pillows, his breathing labored. He understood the chain of command, even in this inverted, bizarre situation. On this ground, at this moment, she was in charge. "Who are you, Sergeant?" he breathed. "Just a nurse, General," she said, the lie feeling thin and useless now. She could see the rank in his bearing, hear it in his voice. This was no mere politician or corporate VIP. This was a flag officer. A faint smile touched his lips. No nurse I ever met could tie a taut line hitch in the dark, or clear a room like that. His eyes held hers. "First group?" "Attached," she said, the one-word answer saying everything. Special Forces medics were often attached to Delta. It was the closest she would come to a confession. A loud bang echoed from the main entrance to the ICU, followed by the screech of metal. They were trying to pry the magnetic doors open. They were running out of time. Anya moved to the side of the glass door, pressing herself flat against the wall, pistol held in a two-handed grip. She could see shadows moving on the other side of the frosted glass of the main doors. More than 3 this time, at least 5. If you were Anya, with limited ammunition and a critically injured general to protect against a superior force, would you try to fortify this one room and make a last stand? Or would you risk moving the general, trying to find a more defensible position elsewhere in the hospital? There was no good answer. Moving him was a risk. His lines could be pulled, his condition could destabilize. But staying here was a death sentence, a glass box waiting for a firing squad. She had to move. "General," she said, her voice low and urgent, "we have to relocate. This room is a fatal funnel. Can you walk?" He gritted his teeth, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. "Let's find out." He stood, swaying, one hand gripping the bedrail for support, the other clutching his wounded side. Every line on his face was etched with agony, but his eyes were clear and determined. Anya worked fast. She ripped the IV bag from its stand, tucking it under his arm. Keep this elevated. She unhooked the most critical leads from the monitor, leaving only the essentials. The chest tube was the problem. The drainage container was bulky. Leave it, the general grunted. It'll slow us down. It'll kill you, she countered without looking at him. A tension pneumothorax will put you down faster than a bullet. She found a roll of tape in the crash cart and quickly secured the drainage box to his thigh. It was clumsy, awkward, but it would work. Another loud crash from the entrance. The doors were beginning to give way. Time to go, she said. She took point, cracking the door to the room and peering out. The main corridor was empty, but the sounds of the assault were getting louder. The remaining hostiles were focused on the main entrance. Good. They wouldn't expect a target to move toward them. This way, she whispered, leading the general out of the room. He leaned on her heavily, his breath coming in ragged gasps, but he was moving. Each step was an ordeal. They were a slow, vulnerable target. Her objective was the stairwell at the far end of the unit. The elevators were a death trap. The stairs gave them options, up or down, a chance to break contact and re-engage on her own terms. They shuffled past the nursing station, a tableau of carnage and chaos. Maria was gone, hopefully hidden in a supply closet. The bodies of the attackers were sprawled where they had fallen. Anya averted her gaze. There was no time for reflection. A deafening screech of tortured metal echoed through the unit as the main ICU doors were forced open. Anya shoved the general toward the stairwell door. Go, go! She turned, raising her pistol, and squeezed off 2 rounds toward the figures pouring through the breach. It wasn't aimed fire. It was suppression. Keep their heads down. Buy seconds. The figures, clad in black tactical gear, dropped into cover, returning fire. Bullets zipped through the air, punching holes in walls, shattering the glass of a vacant patient room. Anya ducked back behind the corner as a round snapped past her ear. The general had the stairwell door open. He stumbled through, and she followed, slamming the heavy fire door shut behind them. They were plunged into the sterile concrete world of the emergency stairs. The air was cool, the only sound their own harsh breathing and the muffled pops of gunfire from the other side of the door. Down, she commanded. They'll expect us to go up, toward the roof. We'll go down, try to get to the sublevels. The hospital is a maze down there. Service tunnels, laundry. We can lose them. The general nodded, his face pale and slick with sweat. He was reaching his limit. The descent was agonizing. Every step sent a jolt of pain through his battered body. Anya took most of his weight, her arm wrapped around his waist, the pistol in her other hand sweeping every landing as they reached it. 1 floor down, 2 floors. The sounds of pursuit were faint but present. They were coming. When they reached the ground floor, she paused, listening. The main lobby would be chaos, police arriving. She couldn't risk it. They would be mistaken for aggressors. This way. She led him past the ground floor exit to another door marked Basement Level 1, authorized personnel only. It was locked. A simple keycard lock. She didn't hesitate. She placed the muzzle of her pistol against the electronic lock mechanism and fired twice. The plastic housing shattered, wires sparked. With a sharp kick, the door flew open. The basement was a different world. A labyrinth of dimly lit corridors, massive pipes running along the ceiling, and the distant hum of the hospital's mechanical heart. The air smelled of bleach and damp concrete. They found a small, cluttered storage room. Anya helped the general to the floor, his back against a stack of cardboard boxes. His breathing was shallow, his color was bad. "Stay here," she whispered. "Don't move. Don't make a sound." He grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "Where are you going?" "Hunting," she said, her voice cold as ice. "They're between us and any chance of rescue. I'm not going to wait for them to find us." She slipped back out into the corridor, a shadow among shadows. This was her element, the confined spaces, the poor lighting, the element of surprise. The hospital had become her jungle. She moved with a silence that was absolute, the pistol an extension of her will. She could hear them now, moving down the stairwell, their voices low and professional. They were spreading out, beginning a systematic search. They were good, but she was better. She flattened herself into an alcove behind a large laundry cart as 2 of them moved past, their rifles held at the ready, sweeping the corridor. They moved like a team, covering each other. They passed her hiding spot without a glance. Anya emerged from the shadows behind them, a wraith of vengeance. She closed the 10-foot gap in 3 silent strides. The man in the rear never knew what hit him. She slammed the butt of her pistol into the base of his skull. He dropped without a sound. The lead man heard the soft thud of the body and started to turn. Anya was already on him. She didn't give him time to bring his rifle around. She grabbed the weapon, shoving it skyward as she drove her knee into his groin. He gasped, doubling over. She wrenched the rifle from his grasp and brought the stock around in a brutal horizontal arc, connecting with his temple. He collapsed in a heap, 2 more down. She now had a rifle, an M4 carbine. The weight of it was familiar, comforting. She slung it over her shoulder and took their spare magazines. Ammunition was no longer a critical concern. She continued her silent patrol of the basement, a predator stalking her prey. She used the noise of the machinery to cover her movements, the steam from the pipes to obscure her form. She found another one near the boiler room, distracted by a map on his phone. She dispatched him with a chokehold from behind, a swift, silent, and brutally efficient execution. The odds were evening out. Suddenly, the hospital's overhead speakers crackled to life, followed by a booming, authoritative voice. "This is the Chicago Police Department. We have the building surrounded. Lay down your weapons and surrender immediately." The announcement was a double-edged sword. It meant help was here, but it also meant the remaining attackers would be desperate. They would be cornered rats, and cornered rats are the most dangerous. Anya knew she had to end this before the police complicated things further, before they blundered into a situation they didn't understand and became casualties themselves. She found the last 2 in the main service corridor leading to the emergency power generators. They were arguing, their discipline finally cracking under the pressure. One wanted to surrender, the other wanted to fight his way out. Anya didn't give them the chance to decide. She stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. "Looking for me?" They spun around, surprise etched on their faces. They raised their rifles, but she was faster. The M4 was already at her shoulder. She fired a controlled pair of shots. Double tap, center mass. The man on the left went down. The last man standing sprayed a wild burst of automatic fire, bullets ricocheting off the concrete walls with angry whines. Anya dropped to one knee, letting the rounds fly over her head. The moment his rifle clicked empty, she rose and fired a single, carefully aimed shot. It took him in the head. He dropped like a puppet with its strings cut. Silence. The only sound was the hum of the generators and the frantic pounding of her own heart. She stood there for a long moment, the rifle held at the ready, scanning the shadows. Nothing. It was over. She did a quick check of the bodies, confirming they were all neutralized. She gathered their comms devices, small encrypted radios. Evidence. She made her way back to the storage room. The general was where she had left him, pale and weak, but conscious. He had one of the pistols she had taken, holding it with a steady hand. "Status?" he asked. "All hostiles neutralized," she reported, her voice strained with exhaustion. "The police have established a perimeter." He let out a long, shuddering breath and let the pistol droop in his hand. "Good work, Sergeant." The aftermath was a controlled storm of activity. SWAT teams in heavy armor finally made their way to the basement, finding not a terrified nurse, but a calm, armed woman standing guard over a high-ranking military officer. The initial confusion was immense. Guns were leveled, shouted commands filled the air. It was the general who diffused the situation. Propped up against the wall, he used the full force of his authority. "Stand down. This woman is under my protection. She is a friendly." His voice, though weak, cut through the noise like a razor. The police, seeing the bearing of the man and the cold competence of the woman, slowly lowered their weapons. Medics swarmed in, and Anya finally relinquished care of her patient. They loaded him onto a gurney, his eyes never leaving her as they wheeled him away. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a sign of respect, a promise. Anya was left in the corridor, surrounded by police. The rifle was taken from her gently but firmly. She was covered in dust and grime, and a smear of someone else's blood was drying on her cheek. She looked down at her scrubs, the simple blue uniform of a caregiver. It seemed like a costume from a different life. And then, through the crowd of uniforms, came Dr. Alistair Finch. He had been escorted to the scene by a detective, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. When he saw Anya, his expression curdled into pure venom. He pointed a shaking finger at her. "Her! Arrest her! She's insane! She brought a gun into my hospital! Look at this chaos! She endangered everyone! I want her charged!" He was blustering, his voice echoing in the concrete corridor. He was trying to reassert his authority, to paint her as the villain, the source of the disruption to his perfect, orderly world. He saw the dead bodies, the bullet holes, the SWAT teams, and his only conclusion was that a nurse had gone rogue. Anya simply stared at him, her face impassive. She was too tired to be angry. The adrenaline was gone, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. She let him rave. A police detective, a grizzled man with weary eyes, stepped between them. "Sir, we're still trying to figure out what happened here." "I'll tell you what happened," Finch shrieked. "This nurse, this unstable woman, went on a rampage. I've had issues with her before. Insubordination, a clear authority problem. I want her license revoked and I want her in a jail cell." His words hung in the air, heavy and ridiculous. The SWAT officers exchanged glances. They had seen the bodies of the attackers, seen their weapons, their tactical gear. They knew this was no simple workplace dispute. But before the detective could respond, a new figure appeared at the end of the corridor. He was a tall man in a perfectly tailored dark suit, flanked by two more men who had the same quiet, dangerous air as the agent who had died upstairs. The man in the suit moved with an unhurried grace that commanded attention. The police parted for him like the sea before Moses. He walked directly to Anya, ignoring Finch completely. His eyes were sharp, analytical. "Sergeant Sharma," he said. His voice was calm, clipped. It was not a question. Anya straightened up slightly, a flicker of her old military bearing returning. "Sir?" The man nodded. "General Thorne sends his compliments. He is stable. You did exceptional work here tonight." He turned his gaze to the sputtering Dr. Finch. It was like watching a hawk regard a particularly loud insect. "And you are?" Finch, momentarily taken aback by the man's sheer presence, puffed out his chest. "I'm Dr. Alistair Finch, Chief of Surgery and head of this hospital, and I want this woman arrested." The man in the suit didn't even blink. "Dr. Finch," he said, his voice dropping a little, becoming smooth as expensive whiskey. "My name is Coulson. I'm with the Department of Defense. This facility is now under our jurisdiction as part of a continuity of government investigation. We are requisitioning your office and all of your files effective immediately." Finch's face went from red to a pasty white. "What? You can't? This is a civilian hospital. On what grounds?" Coulson held up a small radio, one of the ones Anya had collected from the attackers. "On the grounds that a highly organized team of mercenaries just attempted to assassinate a 4-star general on your watch. A team that, according to the call logs on this device, received its final go-ahead from a burner phone that is currently pinging from the desk in your office." The world stopped. Finch stared at the radio as if it were a snake. A strangled sound escaped his lips. He looked from Coulson to Anya, a dawning, horrified understanding in his eyes. He had assumed it was a random act of violence. He had no idea the target was the very man he had ordered to be killed. That's absurd," he stammered. But the denial was weak, pathetic. The human shield made of silence and authority he had built around himself had just been vaporized. Coulson gestured to the two men with him. "Dr. Finch, you are being detained for questioning in connection with an act of domestic terrorism and conspiracy to commit murder against a federal officer. Please cooperate." The two agents moved in, flanking Finch. They didn't touch him, not yet, but their presence was a cage. Finch looked wildly around, seeking an ally, a friendly face. He found none. The police detectives, the SWAT officers, the hospital staff who had gathered at the edge of the scene, they all stared at him with a mixture of shock and contempt. His power, his prestige, it had all evaporated in an instant. He was just a man, a corrupt and terrified man who had been caught. His eyes finally landed on Anya again. He saw her then, truly saw her for the first time. Not as a subordinate, not as a piece of furniture, but as the architect of his downfall. The quiet nurse he had belittled and humiliated was a warrior who had single-handedly dismantled his entire plan. "You," he whispered, his voice trembling with a pathetic rage. "It was you." Anya said nothing. She just watched as the agents escorted him away, his protest dissolving into incoherent babbling. It was not a moment of triumph. It was just quiet. The quiet, exhausted relief of a battle won. Coulson turned back to her. "We have a secure room for you upstairs. We need to get your full statement. The general has been adamant that you are to be treated as a friendly asset, not a witness." Anya nodded, feeling a wave of exhaustion so profound it was a physical weight. She followed him through the corridors, away from the carnage, away from the staring eyes. They put her in a private room, posting 2 agents outside the door. A doctor came and checked her over for injuries. She had bruises, a cut on her arm, but nothing serious. They gave her a fresh set of scrubs. Hours later, after giving a detailed, precise statement to Coulson, she was left alone. She sat on the edge of the hospital bed, the silence of the room a stark contrast to the violence of the night. She had broken every rule she had set for herself. She had revealed her past, her skills, everything she had tried to bury. The ghost was gone. There was a soft knock on the door. Coulson entered, followed by a medic pushing a wheelchair. In it, looking pale but resolute, was General Thorne. Coulson and the medic discreetly left, closing the door behind them. The general looked at her, his gray eyes clear and full of a deep, abiding respect. "They told me what you did. After we were separated, you took them all on alone." Anya just shrugged. "It was my duty to protect you, sir." "You did more than your duty, Sergeant," he said softly. Finch was part of a major corruption ring, skimming millions from military medical supply contracts. I was the lead investigator. When he found out I was being brought here for emergency surgery after my transport was sabotaged, he panicked and hired that team to finish the job. He never imagined the night nurse in the ICU would be a former Delta operator. He paused, his breathing a little labored. "You saved my life. And you saved an investigation that is going to put a lot of very bad people in prison for a very long time." Anya looked down at her hands. They were a nurse's hands, clean, steady. But she could still feel the phantom weight of the rifle, the sickening crunch of bone. "I left that life behind me, General." "Did you?" he asked gently. "Or did it just go dormant? A person like you, with your skills, your training, you can't just turn that off. You can't hide it forever. Sooner or later, the world finds a way to remind you who you are." He was right. She had tried to be a ghost, to be invisible, but her true nature had been lying in wait all along. "Finch is just the tip of the iceberg," the general continued. "The people behind him are powerful. They have reach. My security team was compromised. The agent outside my door was a good man, but he was out of his depth. I need people I can trust, people with a very specific set of skills." He leaned forward slightly in the wheelchair, his eyes locking onto hers. "I'm putting together a new unit, a small, fast response team under my direct command, a medical security and extraction team. We'll operate outside the normal channels. Our job will be to protect high-value assets, both medical and intelligence, when they are at their most vulnerable. I need a senior field operative, someone who knows medicine and who knows how to fight, someone I know without a doubt will hold the line." The offer hung in the air between them. It wasn't just a job, it was a purpose. It was a way back. Not to the person she had been, but to a new version of herself, one that didn't have to hide one half of her life from the other. She thought of Dr. Finch's sneering face. She thought of the years of being underestimated, of being invisible. She thought of the feeling, not of violence, but of competence, of using her skills to protect, to defend. She looked at the general, a man of integrity and strength, and she saw a path forward, a vindication. A small, slow smile touched Anya Sharma's lips. "What's the uniform?" she asked. The general smiled back, a broad, relieved grin. "Anything you want it to be, Sergeant. Anything you want." 1 week later, Anya Sharma walked out of the front doors of Chicago General Hospital for the last time. She wasn't wearing scrubs. She was wearing civilian clothes, a simple black jacket and jeans. She carried a single duffel bag. At the curb, a black sedan with government plates was waiting. Coulson stood by the open rear door. She paused on the steps, looking back at the building where she had tried to hide from herself. It was just a building. The ghosts were gone. She got in the car. It pulled away from the curb smoothly, merging into the city traffic. She didn't look back. She was heading toward a new life, one where she no longer had to be quiet, one where her skills were not a secret to be ashamed of, but a weapon to be used for good. The night was over, and a new day was dawning. And that's how a quiet night nurse reminded an entire hospital and some very dangerous people that the most capable warriors are often the ones you see right through. They are the ghosts until the shooting starts. Thank you for joining us for this story. If you believe in the power of the underestimated and want more tales of hidden heroes, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support is what allows us to keep bringing these narratives to life. We'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever completely misjudged someone based on their job or appearance, only to be stunned by their hidden talents? Let us know below, and don't go anywhere. The next story, about a mild-mannered librarian who was secretly the CIA's most legendary codebreaker, is queued up and ready to play for you right now.